In the waning days of the Dominion War, a new starship could be seen entering the fray. Sleek and agile, it is a rapid departure from the domineering Dideridex. It is the Neorexan class warbird, the most advanced vessel in the Romulan fleet, the embodiment of the lessons of the Dominion War. In many ways, it is a more traditional design, arising from a culture reacting against the social and political upheavals of the 2360s, instead harkening back to a simpler time. Yet while its design is a callback to the past, her systems are anything but. The Neorexan represents the cutting edge of Romulan technology. Its name translates from the Romulan to New King, a title which she would indeed live up to. By the 2360s, there was a sentiment not just in the Romulan Imperial Navy, but in all the navies of the Alpha Quadrant, that the time of small, agile attack ships was at an end, and in the Romulan Empire, the age of the warbird had begun. The assumption being that size and firepower were the most important factors in starship combat. It was this which led to the development of the awe-inspiring Galaxy class in the Federation and the behemoth Dideridex class in the Romulan Empire. At the time, many saw a trend of escalating scale, both in the Federation and in the Romulan Empire. Indeed, it was assumed by many that this trend would continue and the size of starships would continue to escalate. However, in 2370, the Federation made first contact with the Dominion. In the ensuing battle, the USS Odyssey, a Galaxy-class starship, was crippled and destroyed by 3 Jem-hadar fighters. Small and maneuverable, it was difficult for the Odyssey to bring to bear her full firepower. All the while, her slow speed and large size made her an easy target for the Jem-hadar. This episode would be repeated by the Romulans, albeit on a much grander scale. In 2371, the Tal Shiar, in cooperation with the Obsidian Order, launched a preemptive strike on the Founder's homeworld. The fleet was ambushed and subsequently overwhelmed by a swarm of over 100 Jem-hadar fighters. This disaster left no illusions to those in Imperial High Command that the age of the warbirds was at an end, and the birds of prey were now in the ascendancy. While some younger, more impressionable officers called for the return of the bird of prey as the primary weapon of war, older, more experienced officers were more reluctant. The main reason that the Dominion was able to field these small attack ships in such overwhelming numbers was logistics. The infrastructure of the Dominion allowed it the ability to rapidly construct expendable fighters, as well as grow a crew of equally expendable Jem-hadar. And while through the course of the war, both the Federation and Klingons would attempt to mimic this infrastructure, the Romulans remained distinct in their refusal to follow this pattern. Though this was less a deliberate decision and more a matter of pragmatism. While the Klingons could rely on a fully militarized population and a class of ship that was easy to construct and maintain, and the Federation had a vast industrial capacity to call on, the Romulan Empire could rely on none of these things. The Imperial Navy's entire infrastructure had over time become dedicated to the construction of a small number of high-tonnage warbirds, which were expected to be capable of performing most duties, with few genuinely specialized vessels. However, it became abundantly clear that the Dideridex was never designed for the kind of combat the Dominion used. Thus it was agreed in 2372 that a replacement was required. Rather than issue a single generalized request for a replacement, which many feared would simply lead to another unwieldy jack-of-all-trades vessel, Imperial High Command issued 2 requirements. One was for a high-tonnage warbird, which would take over the Dideridex's battleship duties. while the second was for a smaller warbird capable of taking on large numbers of smaller attack ships, as well as being a suitable platform for exploration. The contract for the battleship was awarded to Talari, while Keskachar took on the contract for the multi-role cruiser. Keskachar had made its name in designing the iconic birds of prey of the 22nd and 23rd century. They had little experience in designing large warbirds, and had been slow to respond to the ascension of the warbirds. The project leader at Keskachar was Cantus Carl, a highly successful designer who had earned fame designing the Wing Defender and Danos-class ships. Approaching retirement, this ship was to serve as his legacy piece, and a statement of a new age at Keskachar, whose legend he had done so much to build. In order for the new vessel to meet the requirements of the Imperial Navy, she would have to be extremely maneuverable. Yet at the same time, she had to be large enough to serve as a mainline warbird, two requirements which initially seemed to be wholly incompatible. A myriad array of exotic design concepts would be drawn up in the following year, including the triumvirate concept, a single large warbird capable of splitting into 3 totally autonomous ships. And while many of these exotic concepts would see development in the post-war years, for Cantus they all lacked one thing, namely simplicity. The contract stipulated that the ship be quickly developed and built within 3 years. This would not be possible if the ship's design required experimental technologies to operate. This was in fact the reason that the Diduridex had taken so long to develop. Indeed, for Cantus, the Diduridex represented many of the problems which plagued the Empire in the 24th century. He felt it was overly large, slow, clumsy, over-engineered and unfocused as a design, ultimately embodying the same failures in the Empire. Unlike Talari, who had elected to revise their legendary design, Cantus ultimately rejected the past 20 years of warbird design. Instead, he chose to revert back to the earlier style of stormbirds. This design proved extremely reminiscent of the stormbirds of old, albeit on a much larger scale. As Cantus envisaged, the ship would be over 600 meters long, and he now had the unenviable task of devising a means of giving it maneuverability on par with a ship 6 times smaller than itself. The first step in providing this level of maneuverability was in reducing the ship's overall mass. While Cantus was an extremely talented shipwright, his design style was nearly 30 years out of date by that point, and therefore his apprentice, a young but talented engineer by the name Jares Sal, undertook a redrawing of Cantus's initial design sketches. This he did in close cooperation with his master. It is argued that it was ultimately Jares that would be responsible for the striking features of the warbird, using a combination of sharp curves, smooth angles, and ornate hull plating on the wings. Taking a design that was initially very dated in appearance and bringing it into the present, all while preserving the core essence of the design, as well as better allowing it to fulfill its role. This process saw the projected mass of the vessel drop by 15%. When presented with the updated schematics, it is said that Cantus joked, "A ship built like that in my day would have flown itself apart." Indeed, the new warbird would soon demonstrate how much Romulan ship design had evolved since his day. While the problem of the ship's mass had been significantly mitigated, there remained the issue of providing the ship with impulse engines that could provide the necessary maneuverability. This was something Cantus Carl was able to resolve himself in a characteristic moment of ingenuity. Where others simply saw the vessel's wings as simple nacelle pylons, Cantus saw them as a pair of impulse units, something which was previously inconceivable, but with modern technology was easily accomplished. He further mandated that the impulse units be able to employ vectored thrust, allowing the ship to utilize both its thrusters and impulse units for maneuvering, allowing it uncanny agility. For this reason, the impulse apertures would be wider than usual on most starships. The incorporation of the impulse engines in this fashion are what gives the Warbird its sleek silhouette. However, the contract also stated that the ship be capable of high warp, something that was particularly difficult for Romulan vessels. Fortunately for Cantus and his team, Rannick's star drives had developed a new nacelle pattern, which was inspired by those found on Dominion ships. These Rannick's 6 series engines promised high performance and critically had significantly less mass than any other pattern available. The comparatively high maneuverability of the new Warbird allowed Cantus to give the ship a more aggressive armament. The new vessel would be equipped with 4 heavy pulse disrupting cannons, which had variable rates of fire to effectively engage squadrons of small attack ships as well as larger cruisers. In addition, she was given fore and aft torpedo launchers. However, this comparatively austere armament belies the main weapon of the Warbird, her maneuverability. Cantus envisaged the Warbird using its maneuverability as a means of dictating and controlling engagements, able to pursue enemy ships that were at a disadvantage or evade enemy ships that were at an advantage. This, in conjunction with the cloaking device, would allow the Warbird to indirectly control a large amount of battle space, preventing other ships from engaging without the support of large cruisers, thus mitigating the threat. With the initial design phase concluding in 2373, the prototype was rushed through development at the behest of the Imperial Senate, who were desperate for a ship that could effectively counter the Dominion, whom many began to regard as an increasingly imminent threat. The prototype was completed late in 2373. However, the initial trials were disappointing, largely as a result of its rushed construction. Cantus named the first vessel the Imperial Romulan Warbird Neorexan, or New King. However, so far it had failed to live up to its name. Cantus protested that it was the hasty construction, rather than the design itself, which had led to the disappointing performance, and he insisted that he be allowed more time to refine the design. While initially Imperial Command were willing to allow him this time, this changed when a few months later Senator Vreenak was assassinated while returning from a diplomatic mission. All the evidence indicated the Dominion were to blame, and so the Romulan Empire declared war on the Dominion. This placed further pressure upon Cantus's project, severely curtailing the development time which he had asked for. However, rather than make the same mistake of rushing the project, Imperial High Command decided upon a compromise. Cantus would be permitted to refine the design of the Neorexan. At the same time, a simplified war variant would go into service to bolster the front lines, and they could be refitted at a later date to match the specifications of the mainline Neorexans. However, they would remain distinguishable by the brown coloration of their hulls. This initial batch was comprised of 20 vessels, including the Neorexan, the Datana, and the Vitemi. Construction began in mid-2374, and they were completed and launched later that year, whereupon they were immediately sent to the front lines. The Neorexan class has a length of 604 meters, a wingspan of 912 meters, and a draft of 94 meters. It is comprised of 17 decks, and is operated by a crew of 380. Its armament consists of 4 heavy pulse disruptors with a yield of 74,000 terawatts, as well as 2 torpedo tubes with a complement of 400 torpedoes. Its shields have a capacity of 3,240,000 terajoules. It can comfortably cruise at warp 9 and can reach as high as warp 9.97, making it the fastest ship in the Imperial Navy. Upon arriving at the front lines, the Neorexan began to make a significant impact. Previously, Dominion commanders had only fought the Didurdex, and while the Romulans had improved its systems and altered its tactics, it continued to struggle against the Jem-hadar fighters. This allowed the Dominion to dictate the pace of engagements. Provided that they had fighter cover, the Dominion battlecruisers could effectively engage their targets unmolested by the behemoth Didurdex. However, when the Neorexan arrived on the front, this changed. The new warbirds excelled against the Jem-hadar fighters, and this forced the Dominion to adopt a more conservative set of tactics, so that the fighters were given cruiser cover. However, this then placed the cruisers under the direct fire of the Didurdex. This gave the Romulans further momentum in the war, and the Neorexan was instrumental in the final days of the war, even spearheading the assault on Cardassia Prime itself. However, it would be in the post-war years that the Neorexan would obtain its reputation, quickly becoming the new workhorse of the Imperial Navy, carrying the mantle of the venerable Didurdex. The Neorexan would gain further notoriety when Romulan officers led a counter-coup against the Riemann usurper Shinzon, and while the two ships fought valiantly, they would be unable to withstand concentrated firepower from Shinzon's monstrous battleship. This would lead Imperial High Command to complement the Neorexan with a larger dedicated battleship. This would be in the form of Talari's new Kachan class, and while the Neorexan was not as powerful as the Kachan, she was significantly faster and critically more versatile. The ship is now one of the most prolific vessels in the Imperial Navy, with 200 ships in service, outgrowing even the mighty Didurdex. The Neorexan provides a flexible response package and a precise balance between speed and firepower, and she is expected to last into the 25th century. When Countess Karl passed away in 2376, he did so in the knowledge that he had left behind a worthy legacy, a monument to the glories of his day, and a new king to inspire future generations.